And I just wonder if I wonder if the Greeks have understood the uh, the connection between what's about to happen to them and their wages and the prices in Europe in general, but in Greece in specific, since I'm here, and everything that's going on in this conflict in Ukraine and the actions that Brussels has taken. Because I just don't know if the Greeks understand that Brussels hasn't really, and the EU, they've not really sanctioned Russia as much as they sanctioned their own EU population, it seems. But it is a Brussels that, to me, is under the complete and total control of the neocons. And I say that because Victoria Nuland is doing a tour right now of the area. She was in France. She was in Turkey, I believe, yesterday or 2 days ago, and she's wrapped up her meetings here in Greece, and she's off to Cyprus tomorrow. So, where am I getting with all of this? We've had new sanctions from the EU. These sanctions, my feeling on them is once again they're going to boomerang right back at Europe, and it seems the only country that's got any sense or sensibility is Orban in Hungary, and they're sanctioning now Orban
Yeah, yeah,
because
absolutely.
of the fact that he's the only one speaking common sense.
Yes.
This is madness. But what do you think about everything
No,
that's going on here?
it has a demented quality. Now, can I just say, I think in Greece, where I have many criticisms of the Greek people. Being one myself, I feel I can be critical of Greeks, but it's always struck me that Greeks ultimately are people with a certain understanding of politics, which is perhaps greater than what you will find in some, shall we say, more trusting societies. I think the Greeks will figure it out. I will take them a few weeks and months, and of course they got their media in Greece. But I think the Greeks will eventually figure it out. I think they'll figure it out in Cyprus too. I think in Northern Europe, unfortunately, it's going to take longer. And it is in Northern Europe that all these decisions are being made. Because, as you correctly say, Brussels has been taken over completely by the neocons. So has Berlin. I mean, it's one of the most extraordinary things that one is seeing in Germany now is that Germany, with its big industrial base, its powerful, employers' unions, its industrial associations, all of these people are just not being listened to. I mean, you have Olaf Scholz, a little bit like, the sleepy Joe of Germany. I mean, that's how he comes across to me. I mean, he's not really got any understanding of what's going on. He's got no real grip on the situation. He's trying to keep up some kind of rearguard action. So we've had this latest sanctions wave, which is going to block Russian thermal coal imports into Europe. Now, just to get a sense of what that means for Russia, and I'm going to just say a few things about Russia at the moment. Before I do, can I just say the ruble strengthened again further today. It actually got stronger after the latest sanctions package. The Russian stock markets have risen. I mean, this is what's happening at the moment. And the information I'm getting from Russia, which I cannot confirm, but which I believe to be true, is that the government has managed to cap inflation because because of Russia being food and energy self-sufficient. Food and energy prices are stable. In Europe, of course, they are exploding. And that has provided if you like, a sort of base which prevents the whole thing from tipping into the kind of inflation problems that we see in the West. And, given that they have the food and the energy and the chemical fertilizer, I bring in the subject of chemical fertilizer for a specific reason, they're able to control these absolutely key inputs, food and energy, which are, of course, the things that really affect people where inflation is concerned. Anyway, so that's Russia. Now, coal, the total value of the coal Russia exports to the EU in a year is 4 billion euros. This is against, I believe, a Russian export trade in any one year, which is well in excess of 1.1 trillion euros. It's an insignificant little bite. But of course, the point is that the Russians can always sell their coal to other people. Coal is globally traded and it's easy to sell because it doesn't pass through pipelines. You can put it on trains, you can send it on trundling on trains to the east, you can put it on ships, and China and India are both almost certainly going to be willing buyers because both countries have experienced coal shortages within the last few months. So this isn't going to affect them at all. But if you reject your main supply of thermal coal, which is what the Europeans are doing, you have to replace it somehow, unless you're going to close down all those steel plants and furnaces and accelerate your move away from coal-fired power stations and all the rest. In fact, on the second, if you actually unpack what the EU is proposing to do, they're actually, because they're giving up on, their plan is to reduce their dependence on Russian fossil fuels. They have to import fossil fuels from elsewhere, and that means they're going to have to increase coal exports ultimately if they're going to do with less Russian gas. Of course, doesn't play well into the green agenda, but that's actually, if you go through all the details of the plan, that's what the plan is. So you're going to increase your use of coal. Your coal industry in Europe has been, to a very great extent, closed down. I mean, it's nothing like what it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. So you're going to have to import more coal, but you're not importing that coal from your traditional geographically proximate supplier. Coal is going to increase in price in Europe. The Russians will be able to sell their coal in China and India. Perhaps they will get a little less than they were when they sold it to Europe. But Europe is going to have to pay more for its coal. And the trouble is, this is a runaway train. They're not going to stop at coal. They are already talking now about oil. Before long, they'll be talking about gas, because ultimately they've now got themselves into this frenetic idea that they've got to somehow bring this Russian economy down. So the stronger it looks, instead of backing off and saying this isn't working, we've got to pull back, we're going to cause ourselves even more damage, even more harm. What they're doing is instead they're escalating. They are doubling down and tripling down and quadrupling down on what they're doing. And of course, living costs across Europe are going to surge even further. We're going to have a real crisis, I predict, in the autumn and winter, when it's really going to hit home in a really, really big way. And in the meantime, people are suffering. And at some point, sooner in Greece, eventually, inevitably in Germany, it's going to hit home that it was this extraordinary policy of sanctioning Russia, waging an economic war of attrition that we're not ready for, that is the cause of all the problems.
Yeah, the European Union is imploding. It's going down, and it's going down because of this irrational, hysterical obsession with trying to destroy Russia and to destroy Putin and to destroy the Russian people. There's no doubt about it that the hatred for the Russian people is completely overtaken. Yes. The elite, and I use that word, the elite class in Brussels. There's a saying, Alexander, that a lot of people have used in this conflict, that NATO and the United States, they're going to fight Russia down to the last Ukrainian. It's my belief that Victoria Nuland and the neocons are going to fight Russia down to the last European or the last EU citizen in this war, in this economic war of attrition.
Yes. I completely agree. Now, can I just begin on the topic of Russia? Can I just say something? Because I had some information yesterday. There's been a series of academic conferences which have been convened by, well, I'm not going to say who, but it is a Western entity which has had academic connections with Russia. Now, the people that it deals with are humanities scholars in Russia. Again, I don't want to say more than I can because I don't want to cause embarrassments. But the humanities academics in Russia were the people who have historically been the most critical of Putin and of the Russian government. I mean, if you look at where the strongest opposition has been, the demographic that's been the strongest in opposing Putin, it has been that one. When the war started, there was a massive wobble. A few of them supported it, most of them didn't. What this Western agency has discovered as it's carried out these conferences is that there is now been a stiffening, even amongst this particular demographic of Russians, because they're saying, look, it's absolutely clear that you don't like us. You are hostile to us. So perhaps, in light of this, perhaps our government was right all along. And that I know. I mean, I have reliable information about this. So that's the actual effect. If you wage a war against an entire nation like this, then you're not going to divide it. You're going to consolidate it behind its government, which is exactly what is happening. Now, as to Victoria Nuland, you're absolutely right. That is exactly what she is. I mean, she is a person obsessed. She has a sort of visceral attitude to Putin. She has a visceral attitude to Russia. So have the neocons. And of course, the other thing to understand about the neocons is that these are people who are drunk with their belief in their own brilliance. And of course, they had this great plan. And by the way, I've no doubt that this is all executing a plan. And bear in mind, last year, we saw how all those governments in Europe that might have stood out against this, the government in Austria with Sebastian Kurz, the government in the Czech Republic, you remember how all kinds of strange scandals about Babbage were engineered to bring them down, and how they made a real bid to pull Orban down, how they combined all the parties against him. It was all done basically to clear out the awkward squad in order to open up the way for this sanctions war. I mean, I have absolutely no doubt about this. So the neocons are intoxicated with the belief in their own brilliance. So the fact that their plan isn't working, because it isn't working, it's not bringing Putin down, it's not crashing Russia, it's not breaking the Russian-Chinese alliance, it's not doing any of these things. What it's causing them to do is, of course, they can't admit to themselves that they got it all wrong, because that's not what neocons ever do. It pushes them further to ever further double, triple, quadruple down. And of course, when they've managed to take over the State Department and large parts of the US intelligence community, they've also managed to bring on side the bureaucracies in Brussels, the government in London, and of course large sections of the political elite in Europe. And they will certainly fight this to the last European, because they are not personally affected. From their point of view, if people in Greece, people who, trying to run their businesses in Greece, see those businesses fail, if Mittelstand companies in Germany go under, well, wasn't it Madeleine Albright who once said, that the death of 500,000 Iraqi children was, a fair price to pay? Well, they're not going to lose any sleep over this. They will just continue in exactly the way they have, and they will go on escalating and go on demanding more and more sanctions. And if that doesn't work, well, I don't want to even contemplate what next they might start proposing, but they will go on escalating until someone somewhere, and that logically has to be in the United States, finally tells them to stop, or unless the situation in Europe finally goes smash and we start to see other leaders like Orban start to appear. But I'm afraid we're far away from either of those outcomes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about leaders like Orban. There is no one in Europe who can put the brakes on this in the EU outside of Orban at this moment in time. I mean, I've always looked at the Brussels class, these technocrats that rule over the EU, as more neoliberals and neocons. And now, of course, there's not much difference between the neocons and the neoliberals at this moment in time. But there's no one in the halls of Brussels to say, this is we're taking it too far. Yes, I hate Russia. They could say this. Yes, I hate Russia. Yes, I would like to see Putin gone because he doesn't he doesn't gel with my neoliberal, not my neocon, my neoliberal values. The Obama type of neoliberal values. But what the neocons are proposing is just a bridge too far for us, and our countries are just going south at this moment, and this is a train that we just can't stop. There's no one you can see that can put a brake to this.
No, well, not in Brussels. I mean, just look at the two European leaders. The three of them: Borrell, von der Leyen, and Charles Michel. And look at their statements. Look at their features, because that's often an interesting way of gauging. They're both furious and they're intoxicated. They're absolutely drunk with the sense of power they're getting through this churning out of the sanctions. And I just wanted to mention another sanction. I mentioned chemical fertilizer, which we are desperately short of in Europe anyway. They're now going to start banning potash imports from Russia and Belarus, which is, of course, an indispensable product in making fertilizer. This at the time when the spring sowing season is starting. I mean, I saw an article on Zero Hedge in which somebody said, "Are these people trying to engineer a food crisis in Europe on top of all the others?" Well, as I said, as far as they're concerned, the fact that maybe they are, but I mean, I suspect more. It's a more visceral thing. I mean, even if they were executing some kind of Klaus Schwab type project, I mean, that's a cool, calculated thing. These people are not looking cool or calculated at the moment. They're relishing this. They're enjoying imposing all these sanctions because, these are sanctions against the Russians. We absolutely loathe these people. We're going to block them. We're going to obstruct them. We're going to hurt them in any way we can, every conceivable way we can. But of course, that is exactly what they're doing. I mean, they're working towards creating a food crisis in Europe. Just a few days after, in Germany, some food prices rose by 20 to 50%. So, that's what they want. That's what they want to do. That's what these people are going to do. I don't think there's any salvation to be found within the Brussels bureaucracies. You would look for salvation to the member states. But here, it's almost as bad, because if we're looking at Germany, once upon a time, I can remember Helmut Kohl, for example. Anybody had spoken to him about Germany in the way that they're talking, about Scholz and about Germany today, Helmut Kohl would have told them to take a running jump. He would have said, I'm not going to allow people to talk about my country in that way. I'm the Chancellor of Germany. I'm concerned about the fate of the German people. The German people are essential to Europe and to peace in Europe. I'm not listening to any of this nonsense. If people want to obstruct imports of essential gas and oil from Germany, well, they can just go get stuffed. That's what Helmut Kohl would once upon a time have said. Look at Olaf Scholz. Oh, I'm dithery, man. We have to accept oil and gas for the moment, because if we don't, we're going to have a deeper recession. When he talks in that kind of way, that sooner or later he's going to buckle and he's going to impose upon his own people those sanctions, that he's going to cut off that gas and coal, because he's a dithery non-entity. I mean, he's not a Helmut Kohl. He's not the kind of person who, frankly, would once have been elected Chancellor of Germany. And you see the same everywhere. Now, there's elections in France. There's some talk of the tightening of the polls there. Maybe things will change in France. I will wait and see. I mean, I'm very sceptical that there's going to be any change in France. But tell me where else within the EU, apart from Hungary, there's anybody who's prepared to stand up and to resist this thing. And the same goes for the US. Apparently, the Federal Reserve Board is now tearing out its hair. There's wobbles on the stock market because, they're uncertain whether to tighten or not to tighten. They're talking about tightening a bit more. So nobody quite knows what they're going to do. I read a piece in the Financial Times about how the latest sanction on Russia is to block all American investment in the Russian economy. What American investment? I mean, there has been some, but it's been very minor because the way the US has run the credit rating system has in effect made it very difficult for Americans to American institutions to invest in Russia. I mean, I'm talking about direct investment. I'm not talking about buying bonds. And Americans are now prohibited anyway from buying Russian bonds. But anyway, I read in this article that the United States, the federal government of the United States, the administration, has actually run out of targets in Russia to sanction. And if it goes further and starts to go even beyond what it's doing, in other words, that's a hint about secondary sanctions, it could risk serious dangers to the global economy. And that was one sentence, a long article in the Financial Times. And yet, they still press on. They can't bring themselves to stop. In the United States, there are more diverse institutions, there are more diverse opinions. There's the Federal Reserve Board, which has a general mandate to keep the US economy running. Of course, many people would be very critical about the way it's done that. I would be. But anyway, it's still got some residual independence. We'll see whether things change in the United States. But Europe, it seems to me, is a hopeless case.
Yeah, the United States, NATO, the EU is at war with Russia. Let me read you some statements since you brought up the sanctions in the US, these sanctions on investment, which are meaningless, but they're just the language from Psaki when she was announcing these. Washington expects the sanctions to, and I quote, impose acute and immediate economic harm on Russia. Economic harm on Russia. This is a statement from Borrell, who's the foreign minister, you could say, of the European Union. This is his statement. The EU does not want Ukraine to lose, so it will continue to arm it. This is war against Russia, both on an economic level, by listening to the statements from Psaki, harm Russia, and then from Borrell, a top EU official, saying, we're going to provide weapons to a country that's not in the European Union so that we can destroy Russia. And Victoria Nuland is going around France, but more specifically Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey. And what is she asking for? She's asking for weapons. And I know in Cyprus, what's her ask? She's going to the Cypriot government tomorrow, and she's going to say, I want all the weapons that you purchased from Russia or the Soviet Union, whatever you have.
Oh, no.
We want them, and we want to give them to Ukraine, and we'll give you American weapons after that. That's going to be her ask. This isn't, the Czech Republic is delivering, weapons now to Ukraine. Estonia is delivering weapons to Ukraine. Europe has gone to war with Russia. And Russia has only done one thing to retaliate, and that's the gas for rubles so far. And Europe is reeling. Europe is crumbling. Yeah. What do you make of those statements?
Absolutely. Well, that's absolutely. Let's start with Jem Psaki. So this is going to have an immediate effect on Russia. Well, we saw what that immediate effect was. The ruble strengthened. The Russian stock market rose. That's the immediate effect it had on Russia. Russians are not impressed by a block on American investment because it's never happened in any big way. When Exxon wanted to invest in Russia in a very big way, they were going to develop Russia's big Arctic fields. I remember that was a big deal. Rex Tillerson, who became Donald Trump's first Secretary of State, was heavily involved in all of that. Well, almost immediately the sanctions started to appear and it never happened. So there's never been that big American investment in Russia that would make any sort of difference. So as I said, the ruble strengthened, the stock market rose. Now, Borrell, we are going to arm Ukraine. We? Who is we? Since when did the European Union become a entity that supplies arms? I mean, that's not what the European Union was. I mean, that's not what the Lisbon Treaty says. That's not what the Maastricht Treaty says. That's not what the Rome Treaty says that the European Union were supposed to be. He's talking now as if, he's the leader of some great military superpower. But of course, that's where he's got to. He's got himself into this extraordinary situation. And they're not going to allow you, they don't want to see Ukraine lose. So what do? They're too scared at the moment to send their own weapon systems in any, they're really advanced, their tanks and things like that. And besides, I'm told that they don't have that many of them anyway. So they're rustling up old Soviet weapons left over from the Cold War and a couple sold by the Russians in the 90s. And they're hoping that that's going to make a difference to the outcome. Well, it's not. And I'm hearing reports that Germany, I think it was Bulgaria, no, I think it was Slovakia actually, they've already said that they practically run out, that their stocks are almost exhausted of these sort of weapons. The British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, in that hoax call that those Russian hoaxers arranged with him, he admitted that Britain has actually run out of its own, anti-tank missiles. So, I mean, they're sending these weapon systems into a bottomless pit, and it's not changing the outcome. I can't confirm this is true. I may be entirely wrong. The Russians may be making this all up, but the Russians claim that they've destroyed 1,980 Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles since the start of the war, out of a total fleet of tanks and armoured vehicles at the beginning of the war of 2,500. Well, if those figures are anywhere close to true, what's sending a few dozen more old TCF-72s and 57, old East German BMP-1s, what difference is that going to make? Just provide the Russians with just a few more targets.
All right. Final question. We're watching the European Union sanction the European Union, in essence, or sanction the citizens of the European Union. That's my opinion of things, and I think we're seeing that play out. We're always getting the stories in the mainstream media, whether it's the media in the UK, the US, or in Europe, as to how they're doing so much damage to the Russian government and how the Putin government is crumbling, and Shoigu is ready to resign, or Shoigu is going to instigate a coup towards Putin, or you're any number of things you're hearing from the mainstream media, because their sanctions have been so effective. They've been so good that they've strengthened the ruble. That's how effective they've been. But anyway, that's the spin. That if you're only watching CNN, MSNBC, or reading The Guardian and BBC, you're under that impression. How is Russia going to damage the European Union on an economic level? What do you think they are going to do next? For example, Greece sent weapons. Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece, sent 4 planes of weapons to Ukraine in order to kill Russian soldiers. We know Russia's not going to forget this. What do you think they're saying in the Kremlin about every Greece and Slovakia and Estonia and Germany and France and all of these countries and Czech Republic that are pouring in weapons into this war, and they're fighting against Russia? What do you think the Kremlin's going to do, if anything, to say, okay, noted, you sent weapons, noted, you sent weapons, noted, you put these sanctions, you did this, you did that. Now it's our turn to do what? We've seen gas for rubles. What do you think is next?
Gas, and that's going to expand, by the way, and that's another thing they're going to do. They're going to steadily work towards internationalizing the ruble, making the ruble into internationally traded currency. They paid, by the way, on those coupons, those external debt coupons, in rubles. And by the way, Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, who's, by the way, a lawyer, has issued an extremely clever statement. I read this as somebody who understands these things. He's basically encouraging the bondholders to bring legal claims. He says, go ahead, bring the legal claims. That's what you should be doing. Sue the Treasury Department, sue the State Department, you should sue J.P. Morgan. And he said, you've got a good case. I'm a brilliant lawyer myself, and he is, by the way. He's a very, very good lawyer, very good commercial lawyer. I mean, I know what I'm talking about, and maybe they will do that. So that's one thing they're going to do. They're going to work towards internationalizing the ruble. But in the medium term, in the short term, what you're going to start to see is two things, I think. Firstly, they're going to restrict food exports to Europe. And that's already happening. And that's going to crank up inflationary pressures in Europe even further. And then the next thing they're going to do is they're going to wait, which is what the Russians always do. They're very, very good at waiting until their opponent crumbles. And they made it absolutely clear, Lavrov has said it, we're not going to make any kind of moves, we're not going to make any kind of proposals to repair the situation with the Europeans. We're going to wait this out until you crumble. And if you want to come to us, well, that's the point when we can have our discussions, but don't expect us to be in any kind of accommodating mood up to that point. And I have to say this, I think that's what the Russians do. They always play the long game because, heavens knows, they're always in a position to. When you have vast resources, that is what you do. They will continue with their military operation in Ukraine until it's concluded. And at the same time, they will forge their economic links with China, do so with India as well, with ASEAN, with the South Koreans, with Japan, which, by the way, is now backtracking on sanctions. They made it very clear that they will continue with joint energy projects with Russia in Russia's Far East. So the Russians will just play it long. But you're absolutely right. They will never forget what has happened. They will never forget what Greece has done, a country that they'd had very sentimental feelings about. And I'm afraid Greece, the Mitsotakis government, has alienated forever, and I really do think this, I'm sorry to say, forever, a country, a very powerful country, which was once very anxious to be its friend. And that may have big consequences, especially given that Turkey has played a notably different role here. So they'll restrict food exports, and they'll wait.
You think that's the only thing that they're going to make the ruble, just to close out the video and just so I understand what you think their move's going to be. Yeah. They're going to make the gas for ruble. They're going to make it across all the commodities that they have,
absolutely,
all the resources.
All commodities.
They pretty much said so.
They said so. I mean, that's what they get. So all Russian exports, except to friendly countries. So if you're China, you can pay for food in Chinese